Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm painting up another Trench Crusade model, and this was voted on for November's painting video by my Patreon and YouTube members, and they overwhelmingly voted for Trench Crusade, Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, and I decided to go for the Yoke Fiend, and I decided to go for another Proxy model from Beasterium Games, this time the Aurochs Reaver, which I thought was a really fitting proxy for the Yoke Fiend, and this one's definitely not wearing a dress. So let's get into it. And as this is a speed painting video, I'm going to start from a Zenithal Prime, which is going to be the perfect base as I'm going to be using a lot of speed paints. Firstly, starting with some Vallejo Express Iceberg Grey, which is a really nice desaturated blue colour, and I'm going to give all of the skin a coat of this, which is going to give it a nice blue tint, and that's the idea I'm going for with this model, which is to have a nice cold blue skin tone, and offset that with a nice and vibrant red battle damaged armour, with the rest of the parts being rusty and brown. And I'll be coming back to the skin a little bit later on, but for now I'm going to move on to some Vallejo Express Intense Seraph Red, which is by far my favourite red speed paint, and I'm just going to give all of the armour panels a quick coat, which is going to give them a really nice and deep intense red colour, and I'll be applying a little bit of battle damage later on. Now that I'd painted up the skin and the armour that was the bulk of the model, it was time to paint in some of the smaller details. Firstly, using some Vallejo Express Battle Dress Brown, which is another one of my favourites in the Vallejo Express range, and is a really great light brown colour. And I'm going to use this to paint in all of the hair across the model, and that's going to include the hair on the head and on the tail and hooves, and all of the other randomly placed bits of hair that are generally under the armour panels. I then use some Vallejo Express Mummy White and use this to paint in the horns and all of the hooves. I then switch to some Vallejo Express Greasy Black, which is not a colour I've used that much in the past, but I'm definitely going to be using in the future, as it's a really nice dark brown colour, which is almost an off black with just a hint of brown. And I'm going to use this to paint in all of the cloth around the waist of the model. And then for the handles of both of the axes, I decided to use some Vallejo Express Willow Bark, which is another great brown colour from the Express range, which goes along with my starting principle of having a blue flesh, red armour, and having brownish tones throughout the rest of the model. I then wanted to tackle all of the metallics, and as I mentioned at the start, all of these are going to be heavily rusted. So I'm firstly going to be creating the rust effect, and for that I'm going to be using a combination of some Army Painter dark rust and fresh rust. And I'm firstly going to be base coating all of the metallic areas in the dark rust, and I'm going to be applying this fairly thickly where I can, which is going to help to sell that gritty rust effect. Then I'm going to come in with the fresh rust and give this a very rough dry brush across all of the dark rust areas, which is going to add some orangey spots and areas just randomly across all of the rusted metallics. I'm then going to come in and apply a metallic effect to all of the rusted areas and all of the armor panels as well. And I'm going to be using some Army Painter gun metal, which is a nice mid-metallic colour. It's not too bright and not too dark. And I'm firstly going to use this on the rusted areas. And again, I'm going to be using the dry brush and dry brushing this across all of the raised edges and stippling it on to some of the flat panels. And again, this is going to be quite random, and this should just help to sell the effect of some of the metal shining through the rusted areas of all of the metallics. And I'm just going to apply this exact same technique to all of the red armor panels as well. Just giving it a light dry brush across all of the raised areas and giving it some random stipples and scratches across all of the flat areas. And with this dry brush application of the gun metal, it's going to add some realistic looking battle damage to all of the armor panels and take away that overly clean red look that would be really out of place for Trench Crusade. And unfortunately I lost the first half of this footage, but at this stage I decided to highlight up the flesh using some Citadel Pallid Witch flesh, and I just thinned this down with a brush full of water just to thin it down slightly, and use this to highlight up all of the skin just by following the contours of all of the muscles and leaving the blue tint still in all of the recesses. And this should give the skin a bit more of a sickly off-white colour, while keeping some of the cold blue tones still visible in the recesses. And it only took me a couple of hours to get to this stage, which was to base coat everything and give it a basic highlight and some battle damage, and then give it a full coat of some satin varnish in preparation for the next phase, which was to apply some Villainy Inks Decrepit Filth. And this is going to act as a unifying wash across the entire model, along with adding some additional shade and giving it that filthy Trench Crusade look as well. And then after allowing that to dry for around 30 minutes, I then come in with a makeup sponge and use this to wipe away all of the excess decrepit filth from all of the raised areas. And as long as the enamel wash hasn't dried, you shouldn't need to use white spirits, but if it has dried, you can just dip the tip of your makeup sponge in some white spirits, and that'll help to remove any stubborn, dried, decrepit filth. And I'll just take my time going around the entire model until all of the excess enamel has been wiped away. And once that was done, I'm then going to allow the model some time for the enamel wash to fully dry and cure. And that allowed me some time to work on the base for the model. And a good way to elevate a speed painted model like this is to pay a little bit more focus on creating a nice base. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, and all I've done here is use a little bit of cork board and glue that to the base, and then use some coffee stirrers, which are the perfect thickness for planks of wood that look a little bit like the wooden floor panels from a trench. And I just snap these to size and glue these onto the cork board. And to add some additional detail, I just added some 3D printed crosses and barbed wire, along with some thorny bushes, and just glue these randomly around the base, and this should just help to add a little bit more character to the entire model. And I'll just use the same techniques from the model to paint up the base, using speed paints along with some rust and moss and oil effects as well. And then the final thing to do before getting the model glued to the base was to add a few blood effects using some Army Painter True Blood, and randomly applying this to certain areas, like the blades of the axes and some of the cuts across the model as well. And then I'll use a toothbrush to spray some blood splatter effects across the chest as well. And that's the model now complete, and I hope you enjoyed this quick little speed painting video along with basing tutorial. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments down below. And as always, a massive thank you to all of my channel members. Really appreciate all of your support. And I'll see you in the next one.